Welcome to the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. Mother Nature has many wonderful things to teach children, but how can we help invite kids to explore gardens and plants? In this episode, we chat with author, gardener, and broadcaster Matt Biggs about how we can share the beauty and the lessons of nature in the garden with the children in our lives. This is Mother Earth News.
Good day, everyone, and we appreciate you for joining us on another exciting Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. I am Kenny Coogan, and joining me today is gardener and broadcaster Matt Biggs. At Mother Earth News, for 50 years and counting, we have been dedicated to conserving our planet's natural resources while helping you conserve your financial resources. Today, we are going to discuss gardening with kids. Matt Biggs is a graduate of the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, and is a well-known gardener and author of 15 gardening and plant-related books. He is a panel member on the BBC Radio 4's Gardener's Question Time. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Oh, Kenny, thank you ever so much. Thank you for having me.
We are excited to have you, and I hope, and I still believe, kids are attracted to nature and gardening. What are some characteristics that nature and gardening have that can compete with today's phones and the internet in a child's point of view?
Well, the one thing is that they should, that's a great question, Kenny, because they should get rid of their phones and their internet and get outside, and their parents can be really influential in that. Once they get outside and they look at the plants and they understand how important they are, what they do for us, how fascinating they are, the extraordinary places where they live, in the water, in the mountaintops, in the desert, in the rainforest, and start to get that information and it starts to become alive to them, then I think it will take them away, in part, I think, from the from the modern things like the phone. And what the problem is that all their other friends are living life through the telephone and through the telly and through Netflix and whatever it may be. What we need is for them to get outside and at least have it as part of their life, and at least make sure that they realize the importance of plants, the importance of animals, that they learn about ecosystems, they learn about conservation, because in conserving the plants particularly, then you will find that the children will get an understanding and appreciation of nature. And this is why school gardening and garden clubs at lunchtime. I've got a friend called Lara, and she runs something for the children called School Beans. And she does a phenomenal amount of work to get the children out. She's really creative. And you also then need inspiring teachers. That's really important. But I think children should learn, plants are the most important things on this earth. Without the plants, there will be no animals. They will have no habitat. All the habitats in the world involve plants. They're places for the animals to hide. They camouflage themselves. They're places where they get their food. They're places where they make their nests. And all these things, if you take the plants away, then there is nothing for the animals to live on. The animals will go as well. And one of the reasons for writing this book was that I wanted to make children interested in plants with fascinating examples and cure this thing that's known as plant blindness, the fact that we just don't really see and don't register. Plants don't bark, they don't run around, you can't throw them a ball, you can't sit them on your knee and stroke them generally. So we don't relate to them in the same way, but we've got to learn to understand how important they are for our food. If you have a burger with salad in it, even the lettuce and the tomato, the gherkins or whatever, they're from plants. If you bite into an apple, crunch, that's the fruit from a tree. And all of the cereals, all of the vegetables, your clothes, you can't see, listeners, but Kenny's got a really cool t-shirt on. And I bet, I can't quite see what the print is. Oh, right, it's a carnivorous plant with an ant near it. Look at that. That's superb. So he's wearing a really cool T-shirt with this image on it of a plant. Now, the T-shirt's probably made of cotton. which is plant-based material, and the sort of logo or the image on the front is a plant. So without it, he wouldn't have a shirt on and he wouldn't have it ornamented either. So, plants are there all the time. We've just got to be aware of them.
Do you see any repeating phobias with kids and gardening? Are there any repeating hurdles to get them away from the electronics and outside?
Yeah, there are, because some of them aren't used to getting their hands dirty. So when the children are playing, I mean, I can remember as a kid, we would go out and we would play, and we would play in the woods. We'd make dens, we'd get dirty. That wasn't a problem. I'd do a bit of gardening with my mum, use my hands to dig holes rather than trowels or what have you, because it's much easier to control. And children are used to getting dirty. I think parents are too precious with their children, possibly for safety reasons, that they can't go out and about and roam and ramble like I used to. But it's also the fact that there's this sort of fear of getting dirty. And I think you've just got to overcome that. We're far too sort of clean. And I think that's where community gardens are good as well. Because when community gardens are they're places, where people congregate, they build up the community, the children can garden, they can get stuck in to planting beans, planting lettuces, whatever it may be, and they can really get involved. So I think the barrier is the artificiality of our life and the way we've created our cities, because we've got, in many ways, cities expand, taking up important habitats. And so you can live in a city and be a long way from the countryside. When I go into London, I live at 30 miles. What's that in kilometres? I know, about 23k or something like that from London. And I catch the train into London. Now, London is really interesting because there are lots of green spaces. If you look at the number of parks, and I guess now, Kenny, in North America, green spaces are incorporated into towns because they realise it's important for people's well-being. And of course it is, because that was our habitat. That's where we came from, with this idea that it's good for the children, it's good for their mental health. They communicate with one another when they're gardening. They share the successes, they plant the seeds, they see things grow. So many things are happening, and people go and sit in there for their own well-being. Gardening for mental health is a big thing in UK. I'm sure it is in the US. It can be prescribed for people. Doctors prescribe it. People say they feel better when they go in gardens, and all these things that, as a gardener, I know you love your plants, Kenny, and I've gardened for years. If they'd have asked us, we could have told them like decades ago how good gardening is for the spirit and the soul and the mind, and how much better you feel after time in the garden.
So and not just for kids, for everyone.
It's not just for kids. No, it's for the children. I think it's really important because it's fresh air. They can play, and I think making it into fun. Draw with water-based paint, so drawing faces on the bean seeds before you put them in the ground, and give them a name. All those kind of things. You can teach the children recycling by punching holes in yogurt pots or old coffee cups, that kind of thing. So there's all sorts of lessons, I think, and children need to be taken away from from the electronic world, the artificiality, and then taken out into the garden. And I think when they are young, they're so receptive. I went to a school to publicize the book, and I wasn't prepared enough to take stuff in. I got no props, but we had slides. But it was really interesting because the children at that age, the books for 6 to sort of 10-year-olds, but in actual fact, an 85-year-old lady said she found some information out of it. It's really interesting. So it is, the facts in there are for everyone, because we're all children at heart. We're all curious, and we all want to know. So I think once you get the children out there, then you're well on your way, I think, to getting an interest. And I think there is more, let's say, with the schools and school gardens, I think, and community gardens. I think the children are being informed a lot better, and discovering gardening and plants and the outdoor as a hobby.
Now, we ask our listeners to go to our social media platforms and ask questions for future podcasts. And Mary Holmes writes, quote, "Our 7-year-old granddaughter loves the outdoors, but she is very afraid of small flying bugs. Flies even scare her. She becomes so afraid it's verging hysterical. Can you offer suggestions in helping her get past this? We have gotten insect books and even collected dead ones and looked at them with a magnifying glass." Okay, now that I've said it, maybe that's what's scaring her. End quote.
Yeah. Well, but as a parent, I know that we can only do our best. There isn't a guidebook, to tell you to prescribe everything that you can refer to and go to to that to solve the problem. So one thing I would say is that it might be worth getting professional help, because you've done all the common sense. What do we do? Well, we take, what's the little girl's name?
They didn't mention.
No. So you take your little daughter out there. So you've done that. You've seen she's seen the honeybees. She's eaten some of the honey that they make, for example. So I would say perhaps go to get some qualified help for that. Lots of people have phobias. Adults have phobias of all kinds of things. I've got a bit of claustrophobia because I'm used to being outdoors and I hate going on the underground. Have you got a phobia, Kenny? What's yours?
Oh, good
No.
question.
No, well, you're all right. Well, you're
No,
lucky.
no, no.
But
My real phobia is people not showing up to a public speaking gig.
oh yes,
I need 100 people because that's relaxing to me. If 10 people show up, that's where the phobia comes in.
wow, yeah, that's fair
Now,
enough. Yeah, I can understand that. I once had 4 people turn up to a talk. That was, and I know what you mean, because you also put lots of effort into it, and you want everybody to enjoy the subject that you love. So everybody's got some kind of little phobia or worry. So one is that I would get the because you've done so many things, you've looked at them under microscopes. There's an insect book. It would be interesting to find out why your little one is frightened. She might be able to tell you, or she might, as I say, to tell a independent counsellor. And if you can actually overcome that, and it may be something that she grows out of as well, because when you understand things,
yeah,
then life is much better for us all, and you understand that the insects aren't going to sort of hurt her. And yes, there may be, in the area where they live, they may live in tropical zones, or maybe poisonous spiders or whatever it may be, but most things only bite you if they're frightened. They'll bite you if they want a meal sometimes, like the midges and the little gnats and things like that, but most things don't want to cause you any harm. And I think that's the one thing. But definitely in that case, and I wonder whether we've mentioned carnivorous plants. I wonder whether carnivorous plants might be an interesting one for her,
yeah.
because she can see the insects disappear.
Yeah,
And
I
that
was thinking what you were mentioning, like the interdependence of plants and animals and insects. And maybe if she knew that the flies are providing food for frogs, and then the frogs are providing food for, X, Y, and Z, and how the
yeah,
plants are related to that, maybe when she sees like the big picture, she won't be as afraid.
yeah, I think I think it's worth I think it's worth going to see someone about it, but we don't know how old she is, and I think it might be one of those things where she grows out of it with understanding.
They wrote
uh,
that she's 7 years old,
7, yeah,
pretty young.
it is, yeah, 7. So I've got a pal, actually. You just reminded me. I've got a friend who's got a little girl, and they have sort of spiders, in the house, in webs and things like that, in corners of rooms. And she's this little girl was adopted from the city, and was frightened of them. But this friend of mine, Lucy, is sort of teaching her about the spiders and holding them in her own hands. And I think the other thing is, anyone listening, if you've got a little child, then for goodness sake, get them outside when they're very, very young, so they grow up with it and they don't get frightened. It's just a natural part. I mean, one of the great botanists, Linnaeus, his father, when he was a baby, was so determined that he should be into plants that he made little sort of wreaths of flowers and put them round and entwined flowers around his cradle. And then he was sort of put outside to crawl around in amongst the flowers, and the grass and what have you. So he was right in there from an early age. And I think that's one way of avoiding, problems such as this. Mary, I wish you well with this, and I'm sort of really sorry to hear it, but I'm sure it's resolvable. One day, your little girl will become a great gardener and lover of wildlife and nature. This is just the beginning. It's just a little hiccup at the beginning, and in the long term, you'll be fine.
Now, I think butterflies are kind of a natural gateway for kids to go outside and garden. Do you have any tips for somebody who wants to begin a butterfly garden project in their backyard?
Yeah. So the other thing is you don't need lots of plants. You just need some. It's remarkable how, for example, if you leave, it's happened here actually at home. If you leave a bucket or something similar to fill with rainwater, and even more so a washing up bowl because it's lower, frogs will find their way into it, and you'll look in the spring and you go, oh my goodness, it's full of frog spawn. So you've just got to put things out. So it'll vary throughout the world, but you've got to put somewhere where the eggs can be laid. So, the right species of plant, somewhere where the caterpillars have somewhere to feed, and then something for nectar for the butterflies. So you actually need sort of 3 different types of plants. And the greater the diversity of plants you get, then the more kinds of butterflies. And what I've done in my front garden is to plant. I've got a wildlife area or a wild area. So I've got heritage fruit trees because I'm interested in the histories and the stories. And the fruit tastes of all different. So, for example, we've got Pitmarston pineapple, which is an old British variety that does taste of pineapple, and Darcy spice, another old one, does taste of spice. So I'm getting productive. I'm getting fruit trees, and I'm growing them as cordons. So I've got about 36 in a small space. So they're only sort of 60 centimeters apart and at 45 degrees. So you've got early blossom for the bees. I've got a wildflower meadow. Well, it's not really a meadow, but that's what they call them. It's an area of wildflowers. It's not big enough to be a meadow. We have a great one called the oxeye daisy, which the butterflies love, and then that's followed by knapweed and some of the composites. There is egg laying in the shrubs in the hedge. So I think if you're going to start on butterflies, do your research, find out which are the most common butterflies in your area, or even the rarest, of course. If you could buy plant things for the rare ones, then you might have a chance of them coming in. But it's normally those sort of 3 categories that you need to provide. And then you get some plants like we have. They'll grow in parts of the US and North America. The buddleias are always great for butterflies. So in the UK, you can stick one buddleia plant in there, and 24 different species of butterflies have been noticed, have been recorded on them, feeding from the nectar. So it's like with all kinds of gardening, do your research beforehand. Find out what soil type you've got, what's going to grow well on there, what's going to be successful. Then find out which species you need for providing, whether it's nesting sites for birds or where it's best to site a nest box, all these kind of things. Do your research beforehand, and perhaps join a local group or find a local expert. And they, if you're nice to them, they might even come round, because you'll find, as you know, Kenny, that if you ask an expert, say, oh, I'm really interested in butterflies, I'd love to, make a butterfly garden. There'll be things on the internet, of course, but if you can get someone round, would you mind coming to have a look round and see? Because I want to, and they think, oh, great, here's somebody else who's interested in the same thing. I'll really help them. And I think the great thing about personal contact is you get your questions answered straight away. An expert can come and look at the lie of the land, see where the sun shines in the morning, afternoon, evening, see where the shady bits are. Yeah, this plant can go there. The butterflies will love that. Yeah, it'd be fantastic for egg laying. Or you can, take cuttings or propagate plants to keep everything cheaper, which is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm making a little narrow border the lavenders, which the bees and the butterflies love. I was really excited. There's a butterfly called marbled white, which I know has habitat probably about 5 miles away on chalk downland, but I found one in the garden on the lavender. The lavender hedge then got rosemary beetle, which wanted to eat the lot. So I've replaced it with another kind of hedge, but the seedlings of the lavender have fallen into the gravel. So I'm now making a low budget border out of those seedlings. So it's seedlings of plants that have appeared in the gravel or other parts of the garden. I'm planting those up, and then a friend is bringing some cuttings of salvias, which are, good late summer flowers for us. So that's going to be cuttings. That's not going to cost me anything. And I'm going to get, there's a lovely verbena, which the butterflies love, Vena bonariensis, which has square stems. It's quite sort of long and wand-like, and sitting on the top of the stems are purple, little clusters of purple flowers, and the bees and the butterflies love that. So the idea is to just buy one of those as cheaply as possible, and then it will self-seed in the gravel, and I'll move those self-seeded ones into the groups and make a border for as little as possible.
When I was a kid, my parents told me I had enough animals. I had chickens and ducks and pigeons and cats, and they said no more animals. But then when it came to plants, they said, yeah, you can have more plants. But then the real joy was the propagating and experimenting with the propagation and doing cuttings and doing seed propagation. And then you have a little forest, when you're a teenager.
But the great thing, and seeds for children are fabulous, because in fact, when my daughter was little, when she was under about 3 or 4, I used to use her for planting lettuces, because she's got tiny little fingers. And I'd say to her, Chloe, just, put these, just go like this with your fingers, rub them, pick up a pinch of seeds and then rub them together and move it along so that they scatter. And of course, when it came to putting peas into the ground, she could very delicately pick them up individually and put them down rather than my great lumpy hands. And of course, you then cover them over and you water them and you wait and you hope, and then, oh wow, here comes the peas have germinated, here comes a lettuce. And what's remarkable, I think, is if you look at the seeds, get the children to look at the seeds of all kinds of plants, they are nothing compared to what comes. And so there's the watering, there's the excitement of germination. I know you have to protect them against pests and diseases, but then you can perhaps eat them at the end, or they'll produce berries, or they'll smell fragrant. And I think growing from seeds a wonderful thing. And you still get that excitement, don't you, Kenny? Even now, like as someone who's gardened for ages, every year when you sow your seeds in the spring and they come up, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. You see them just pushing through the compost or just emerging from the ground, and that's a seed that you've sown. And it's one of those things where you water it and you look at it and you keep checking, and it's almost magic, because you don't know what prompts a seed to, obviously we know that it needs warmth and it needs moisture, but how do seeds know? It's a little bit like when the leaves fall, in the fall, the leaves, or how do they know? They haven't got brains, they haven't got eyes, and yet somehow they can sense that it's time to shed your leaves. So there's all these little miracles going on in the garden. And I think if you can get children to, take part in this, in the seed sowing, so they can eat, in the seed sowing, so that they can cut the flowers and take them in the house and really get to be part of the garden, then they will understand why they are part of Mother Earth. We're mammals, and we're part of this big ecosystem. It's just unfortunate that we have the potential to do the most damage and are realizing it.
Yeah, I think listeners should play this podcast to their children, because your enthusiasm is contagious for gardening.
Well, thank you very much. That's really kind of you, Kelly. But it's something to get excited about. It's something that the children can be excited about as well. And I think that's it. You should never, listeners, don't ever grow up. Don't grow up. Still have that wonder and the excitement. And if you can capture that, there's nothing stopping you. It's only that we grow sort of older and we think we ought to behave in a certain way. And that's why, if you are passionate about something like you are, Kenny, away you go. it's really exciting to provide habitat so that the birds can come and nest. Welcome to my garden. Come in and nest. Come in and drink the nectar, bees and butterflies. You're really welcome. Come round to my house for breakfast. Come round to my house for dinner. And even with pests on some of the plants, you have to tolerate them for the greater benefit, I think.
Now, speaking of dinner and peas and lettuces, a couple of years ago, you wrote a book about some out of the ordinary edibles. So what are some of like the fruits and vegetables that you would recommend for kids to grow, or maybe adults to grow, so that they're not only interested in gardening, but eating from the garden?
Ever since I've been gardening, I've always, each year, in fact, tried to find something different. What I found with a lot of them is that they're novelty crops for a reason. And that is that they're not hugely productive, but they can look fascinating. So you might be in a sort of tropical area and grow something like the horned melon, the guano, and that is great. And I think I had a go at growing, and things like amaranth were great for I had a go at growing them here for their crops, and chrysanthemum greens, and for Chinese food, and even things like hostas, which are normally a garden plant, or if you've got a bamboo cane in your garden, then you can eat the bamboo shoots, and even like aronia berries, which are superfoods. We don't necessarily have them on the menu. So again, it's going to find plants that are suitable for your area, and you can extend. And again, the name escapes me. It'll come back in a minute because I've planted it, and golly, it produces a great big tuber. Flowers. It's a member of the pea family, and it flowers in the UK round about now, and it has pea-shaped flowers in tight clusters, and they're bronzy coloured. And I've got that growing, and you eat the tuber, and I can't think of the name of it. Hopefully, it will come to me before the end of the show. I can see it. It's in a big pot in the garden, just about 30 yards away. So and that will die down, but it needs to be kept in a cool, frost-free place in the UK over winter. And of course, even runner beans are perennial. I've had a go at growing runner beans as a perennial. We grow them as an annual because you get the natural vigor. You can change varieties, the varieties that you grow. But there are some of the other crops that you need to protect over the winter.
When I was teaching kids, I was surprised by how middle schoolers, ages like 10 to 14, didn't know how to water a vegetable bed in a way that didn't knock over or drown the seedlings. They kind of just were hosing down all of those things. And to me, it was really instinctual. Like, we've waited 14 days for this tiny little seed to emerge, and now we have to be delicate. And the kids were kind of all haphazard. So I was wondering if you've noticed any gardening skills that kids need to be taught and nurtured more than others.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, because you tend to, and it happens from time to time when I'm watering my seedlings. So I've got a watering can with a very fine rose, on the end of it. That's very delicate, and you just start watering before you go across the seed tray, and then stop watering when you've gone beyond, so it doesn't all puddle at the ends. And it's really frustrating when I haven't put the end of the rose on, properly on the end of the watering can nozzle, and it comes off. So that's one thing that's always worth doing. I think also with the children, it's a good idea to have something sort of fairly robust. So if they're picking sweet peas or something like that, they can make it so you're making allowances for the fact that they can be a little bit heavy-handed and haven't yet sort of coordinated brain and finger and hand necessarily. I think if you tell a child to be careful, then they will. But also, I think with the seedlings, it's explaining. It's like these little, before you water children, these are little babies, and you've got to give them the right kit as well. You've got to give them a fine watering can rose. There was a chap in UK who used to have little plastic screw top bottle top waterers, basically, and they were the size of a bottle top, and you could put them onto the end of a half bottle of water, and then much easier for the children to hold. I've still got some, and the spray is very light. And I suppose the other thing that is easier, that if you find that the children are, can't quite judge watering, then you can flip it the other way and put the seed trays in a bath of water and water them from the bottom. And it's like, oh, come on, children, let's have, you go into the bath, you have a bath at home. So let's give our seedling, all our little babies, a bath and watch the water. And can you see the colour of the soil? Yeah, it's changing. Who can spot it first? As the moisture the moisture sort of moves by capillary action up the soil. So I think, you as an adult have got to think before you give the children things, and you've got to do the thinking for them. I'm thinking about the little ones here.
Yeah.
And once they get older and they can take instructions. But the other thing is, use child size watering cans. I know this sounds daft, but don't give them a big
gallon
can. Yeah. Give them something that they can manage, so
Yeah.
it's the same with the tools. And I would say, encourage them to get their hands into the soil. I don't know about you, Kenny. I don't like wearing gloves, and I do like to dig with my hands, like even now, because it's lovely to feel the soil, but also because they're just on the end of your arms, you've got that direct contact. You can feel the depth, and you can enlarge things a lot easier, I think, than you can with a trowels and the like are good if you've got a decent soil. But I'm on clay, or I've got raised beds, so it's just a matter of choosing the right time to do the digging. I have got, by the way, a children's spade, which is for the adults listening. A children's spade is excellent for planting. So you've got that extra bit of leverage on there. So if you're trying to plant with a big spade, quite often it makes a hole that's too big. And so a children's spade is almost like a trowel on a long stick. So you get the leverage in there. And I've got a children's spade that I use for lots of my planting of shrubs and herbaceous plants. And whenever there's a hole, of moderate size required to be dug, then children's gardening kit is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I think it's thinking around subjects all the time. I'm working with children. How am I going to make them excited? I think the other thing is, if you've got a garden shed or something, or a bench for them to sit on, or whatever it may be, then paint it. Paint it bright colors, paint butterflies on it. So make everything that you've got, paint butterflies and flowers and bees. And so wherever they look, there is, they're not just looking at a dull old shed, they're looking at a blue shed with climbing plants growing, up the side, so you can make it productive. And any spare areas, I think, paint up to make the whole thing vibrant. And if you're putting stakes in, so I don't know, staking dahlias or something, then paint the stakes of different colors. So wherever they go, they've got this really positive vibe. Wherever they're looking, they're seeing plants, whether real or images, paint, and get them to make scarecrows and have a pink wheelbarrow. All these kind of things improve the quality of life with the energy that comes from color. A lot of gardening is very earth colored or green. I've got a green wheelbarrow. I've got an orange lawnmower, and the spade handle is brown and what have you. Now, if you've get some children's kit, it's worth investing in it. And give it to them, and it's theirs. This is yours to look after. This is yours. Come and help me in the garden, do some digging. Come and help me, make some seed drills. And it's almost like they can do their apprenticeship like they used to sort of years and years ago, like my granddad will have learned from his father. And I learned things from my mum. So interestingly, I went to a talk years ago by this really inspirational headmaster. And he was so keen on the fact that not every child was academic, but some of them are practical. And one of the practical areas that they could go into was either agriculture or horticulture. And what he did was he brought in some of the older people from the nearby gardening club to come in at lunchtimes to teach the children. And a lot of these children came from difficult families, or perhaps didn't have grandchildren of their own that were nearby. And so it bridged the gap, he said, between the children and the adults. The adults loved telling the children. The children had the security of, of somebody coming round and gardening with them. And he said it was like incredibly beneficial for the children to have, a lady or gentleman who came round, or a little group of ladies and gentlemen that came round. And it gave them a security. And of course, the person could spend time with them. So perhaps the children came from a big family where, say there was 5 or 6 kids. Well, mum would be driven to distraction by that number of children. I wouldn't have time to spend with the children individually. But the mentor, the gardening mentor would, they would come around and focus on them, and they could talk to them and build up a relationship with them and learn to garden together. And he said it literally bridged the age gap instantly. And I thought that was a great thing. There's these spin-offs with gardening. It's not just growing vegetables or flowers or climbing plants or picking sweet peas or growing lettuces. It's not just that, but it's all these other benefits that the children get, and of course that adults can get as well. And it's this exchange of knowledge. It's such a wonderful thing, gardening. It's just so, when you start to look at it, it's just good for us, good for the earth, makes us aware of the importance of green and plants and nature.
That sounds like a great program that people in the US should be trying to implement at their kids' schools and community centers.
Yeah, it's people like Ron Finley, who's, gone out and dug up the verges and stuff. He's great. He came and gave a talk in the UK, and, I was privileged to meet him. And he just went off on one, didn't he? And said, this is what we need to change people's diets, to improve their living environment so that they can go and harvest things from off the street and it belongs to everyone. I mean, the whole sort of philosophy behind that was quite amazing. And he's an inspirational guy. So this idea of, gardening within the community, I think, is important for bringing people together as well.
Yeah, I want to go back a little bit when you were talking about giving the right tools and equipment to the kids. And earlier, before the podcast, we were talking about carnivorous plants, and I love carnivorous plants and I love bog plants. And I was told by a gardener once that it's so easy to drill a couple of holes, like 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch from the top. And then when you have your kids fill the bog or the water, even if they overflow it because of the holes, it's going to come out at just the right level. So the pots are only sitting in the appropriate amount. And speaking of which, Matt, we have a mutual friend, Matt Soper, who runs a very successful carnivorous plant nursery in England called Hampshire Carnivorous Plants.
Yes, he does. He's genius with them. He's just got the quality of his plants are extraordinary, and the range that he sells. Yeah, he does a great service to humankind.
And he asks, what are your favorite carnivorous plants to intrigue kids into gardening?
Well, I think there is one that, it has to be top of the bill, and not always the easiest to grow, and that's the Venus flytrap. Now, the Venus flytrap is extraordinary and still a bit of a mystery plant because it has modified leaves. And if you have never seen one before, you put your hands together in a V at 45 degrees to each other with your little fingers touching. Then if you were pretending to be a Venus flytrap, you would have hairs growing, little trigger hairs growing out of the middle of your hand. And what actually happens is when ants or when insects come along, they walk over the surface. They're attracted to the surface because they all think, oh, great, there's nutrients in here, there's food in here. They are dark coloured, so the flies quite often go there, so they look like rotting meat. And if they trigger, and you'll correct me if I've remembered this incorrectly, Kenny, because you probably know this in your sleep, but if they trigger two hairs or one hair within 20 seconds, and nobody really knows how, the trap goes shut. Now, it makes 2 movements. One is to trap the insect in, and then the other one, it seals it in and then digests it. And so the facts that I like, one is that it's within sort of 20, I've also read 30 seconds, but I've never actually counted. But the trap shuts. So here you've got a plant that can count, and it can count the number of times that the hair has been triggered. It can then shut and then seal. And two things that really amaze me. One is that if you get your hands again and put your wrists together and then move them out as your hands out as though you're holding the ball, your fingers stick up in the air. Now that's your Venus flytrap. But the fingers, if you waggle your fingers, you will see that the fingers actually increase the surface area. So it means that they can catch bigger insects. And I can remember I used to take groups around Kew Gardens, and I always wished that one day an insect would land in there while I've got a group of children. And there's something in the UK we call a daddy longlegs, which is a little body, little fly, crane fly. What's the equivalent, Kenny, in the US? What would that be?
We're familiar.
You've got them, okay.
Yeah.
So it's shut, right? And I was going, oh, this is great. And just this leg sort of stuck out from, between these sort of eyelashes almost. But it's just great that it means that it doesn't waste. So what's the point of, just having a little ant, which is like eating one crisp, when you could have a big dinner? And there's all sorts of things like that. We mentioned the Sarracenias that, that look like flowers. They mimic flowers and they produce nectar. What's a leaf doing? A modified leaf doing, producing nectar?
Sarracenia are the North American pitcher plants.
The North American pitcher plants. So what I do at the end of the year, because they die back down here, and so each year, well, I will leave the sometimes I leave the pitchers on to protect them from the cold weather, and then cut them back down in the spring. Occasionally, I will get towards the end of the English summer, I will get one of these pitchers and I will slice it down just to see what it catches. And when in the conservatory at Kew Gardens where I worked, we would do this. And there were lots of, there were wasps occasionally, but they used to catch cockroaches. Oh, that was amazing. So it's a bit of pest, nature's pest control. But I think every carnivorous plant is fascinating, the way it works, find out where it lives. Like, there are some which don't catch prey. It's a fairly recent discovery, and it basically eats the compost in the leaves. And can you remember what it is, Kenny? It's at ground level, yes, and they have big populations.
Yeah, it's called Nepenthes ampullaria.
That's it. I was trying to think of ampullaria. That's the one, and that just feeds on the leaves. Or we've got in the children's book that I've written. The book's called A Home for Every Plant. So we're looking at different habitats as well as our own home, and it's wonders of the botanical world. And it's Nepenthes raja. Now, Nepenthes raja is big, and scientists wondered how it got its nutrients, and they discovered that there is two species of mammal that use it as a toilet. So basically it's like putting fertilizer on the plants, but they do that directly, so that the shrew and the rat that live on there, that use it as a toilet, the outside of the toilet is big enough for them to put their paws, 2 on the front, 2 on the back. So it's not too big or not too small, just right to fit. And the toilet seat, if you like, produces a sugary secretion, so it actually produces a kind of nectar, so that there is a reward for those that are using the toilet. So they sit on the toilet, and it's almost like sitting on the toilet eating lolly or something like that, or eating a sweet. So they're
sitting on the toilet backwards.
Yeah, sitting on the toilet backwards. Yeah,
having the sweet off of the top. Yeah. So obviously, well, not obviously, but carnivorous plants are a great gateway for kids to get into gardening. And we're going to take a quick break in our conversation to hear a word from our sponsor. And when we return, we're going to continue talking about Matt's newest book, A Home for Every Plant, Wonders of the Botanical World.
Books are a fantastic way to learn about rural and sustainable lifestyles and so much more at your own pace. The Mother Earth News bookstore carries hundreds of volumes to help you learn about composting, seed saving, poultry, brewing, cooking, baking, and so much more. Enjoy perusing titles and getting inspired at www.motherearthnews.com/store.
We are back with author and broadcaster Matt Biggs. Your newest book, A Home for Every Plant, Wonders of the Botanical World, description says, journey across 40 incredible habitats around the world to discover the biggest, boldest, and stinkiest plants. Now, your book is illustrated by Lucia Perini, and all of the drawings are beautiful. So can you share what are some of your favorite habitats or plants that were illustrated for the purposes of this book?
Well, do you know, Lucilla's absolutely made the book because I was looking for. So it started out that I thought, I know what, we'll get some really funky plants, we'll put them all together in a book, and the children would just love them. And then the publisher said, we need a bit more structure than that, Matt. You know, you can't just sort of chuck all your besties in there. So we've put it into different climatic zones, from the tropics through the Mediterranean, through deserts, through aquatic zones, right across the world. It was a really remarkable learning experience for me, I can tell you, because one thing is I realized I had to get the details from scientific papers because they had to be absolutely right. And there's so much on the internet that you can't, that you are unsure of the origins. And it's funny, I've been reading this earlier on, and in Australia, there is a wonderful tree called the bitterbark tree. Now, the bitterbark tree has a fruit the size of what we call an easy peel or a little tangerine. Normally, they would just shed their fruits, and then their fruits will germinate below the tree, and then they would create a thicket of trees. But if there's a wandering emu about and it finds the tree, this is just like, eating chocolate to an emu. So they'll go to the tree and they'll gobble up lots and lots of these fruit. Now, the fruit inside them, they have the little seeds. So they digest the seeds. And of course, emus run out around, they've got a huge range over 100 miles. And as they're running, they're eating and they're pooing. So the seeds come out in their poo. Now, the poo bakes in the sunshine. And you'd think, well, that's okay. The poo's baked in the sunshine. They've got their fertilizer from the emu poo. They'll just grow there wherever they fall. But oh no, this is nature, and nature's full of exciting and interesting things. So what happens is it bakes in the sunshine, and then the seeds, the seed capsules explode, and the seeds get dispersed. And then the ants come along and they go, oh, this looks good. There's a little oil capsule on each seed. That'll be really sweet and full of really nice oils that will give me energy. So they take it back to their nests to feed the ants in the nest and their young. And then they take the seeds that have been used and they put them on their compost heap, and then the seeds germinate. So you've got this amazing tree that the emus eat the fruit, the emus do their poo, the poo bakes, the seeds explode, the ants go, oh, great stuff, lunch. And then they take the capsules explode, and the seeds get taken by the ants to a place where they'll grow. And it was that kind of thing that I just thought, wow, this is the kind of thing that captures the imagination of adults and children. I mean, I found there was another Australian one actually, called the Western Australian Christmas tree. And it's a tall tree, gets to be, about 4 or 5 meters tall. Great, bright orange flowers, fantastic orange flowers around Christmas time, hence its name. Now, it uses its roots to tap into the root systems of other plants. And what it does is it's like a pair of secateurs or a pair of scissors, and it will cut through the roots with these sharp blades. And then when it gets into where it can take the nutrients, it starts drinking them up. Now, in the 1950s, NASA in America put a space station right out in the middle of the Australian scrubland to track satellites going around the world. And they built this station. Everything was fine for a few months, and then suddenly the electrics kept on going. So the lights would go out or something, the computers had stopped working, and they checked everything and they got the electricians in. And in the end, they dug up the cabling that was providing the power, and they found these little snippers from the trees. So these little sector things had cut through armored cables, thinking that they were roots and causing the lights to fuse. And that, I thought, wow, that's incredible. One is that they've got this ability to sort of be semi-parasitic on other plants, so they steal food from them. But even more so, the fact that they could cut through armored cable, thinking that it was a root. So they're clever, but not that clever, because they did the cutting through, but didn't get the food. and things in the tropics, the giant water lily, which fortunately changed its Latin name so I could change it in the book. So for years and years, it's been Victoria Amazonica. But the scientists were looking at it and said, actually, we've got extra species here. So they called it Victoria Boliviana, and they did it just in time. So I could change the name in the book and change the habitat where it's found. And that's found in an area of marshland and bogland and flooded forest called the Pantanal in Brazil. And that's 3 times the size of Switzerland. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, that is huge. And they actually live in sort of the pools and the floodplains there. And they have these huge leaves up to 3 meters across that have got spines on the underside, so the fish can't eat them. They've got little holes in the surface, so when the rain comes down, they drain away, and a little V-shaped notch in the lip of the leaf. And they've got a flower that comes out one evening and only flowers for 2 days. So the first night, it opens up and it's white, and I've seen them in flower and they're absolutely beautiful, but the fragrance is like a pineapple fragrance, and the scarab beetles flying around, they go, oh, great stuff, it's dinner time, and they fly into the flowers, and it's all about the temperature of 30 degrees C. So in the base of the flower, they will fly in there and they'll go, oh, it's a bit colder, a bit cool up here, oh, but it's warmer down there, and they'll sense that it's warmer and go into the bottom of the flower where the stigma is. They're covered in pollen, whole lot. It's like a little room, and they all get in there and they're all partying and they're all eating the things to eat and have a lovely time. And then once pollination has taken place and the pollen from the beetles has got into the stigma, they think, well, that's the job done. So the top of the flower warms up and they start to think, actually, it's warmer next door. And up they go next door, collecting pollen on their way to this warmer area. The flower collapses, changes color so that the other beetles don't have a wasted journey, and then they fly away and escape. And it's all about this change in temperature as well as the fragrance, and these huge leaves that just dominate the area so nothing can grow. So the spines push out any other water plants, other water lilies that are smaller, and they literally just roll themselves out and push everyone out the way, so that they can be the biggest leaf in the world.
Well, plants are their life cycles are just so mesmerizing. I'm glad you were able to share it in that book. And when kids get into gardening and plants, they might start learning about climate change, global warming, and these topics can be really scary and overwhelming to kids. Do you have any tips on how to start talking about it to kids so they feel empowered and rather than overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think it's really important not to frighten children. I really do, and I wouldn't talk to children about climate change unless they asked about it and been made aware of it, because I just don't. The world's a big frightening place for adults, let alone children. So I would let it come to them. But what I would do, and this is what I wanted to do within the book, is get them to see how amazing plants are, and things like cork are in there, how you can harvest the bark of a tree. It's such an important habitat for so many different species, like the Iberian lynx, that's an endangered species that lives in the cork forest. I would say to them, if they're asked about climate change, you go, yeah, there is climate change, and we've got to avoid using plastics and recycle and do all the things that we can do. But also, one of the key things is, putting plant as many plants as you can, because our back gardens and our gardens are really important nature reserves for flora, the flowers and the animals, and we can do our bit. And I think you've got to give the children, they'll hear things perhaps that are a bit frightening, and you go, yeah, but let's do something in our own garden. Let's grow some tomatoes, grow our vegetables so that there's no carbon footprint. You literally walk to the end of your garden and grow and harvest. So you're growing stuff. You use biological controls. You don't spray things, or you just accept that you will lose a proportion of your crops. You grow your butterfly plants, as we mentioned earlier, but plants for the bees as well, nesting places for the birds. And I would say to the children, look, yeah, we've got problems, but let's do what we can do to contribute towards the resolving of these problems. And in doing so, we can discover nature and learn about plants at the same time. So I think you've got to deliver a positive message to the children. That's the thing, not a frightening, scary one, they will take on board the bigger picture as they get older. But at least they will say, we're doing what we can. And if all the children, and all the parents of all the children who listen to your podcast, if they all, do this, which I know they do, it's their thing. It's about looking after the earth that cares for us. And if the earth is healthy, then we will be healthy. But it's a big challenge, but this is what we like. We like a challenge, and we love proving people wrong. And you can do that in your own little way by living the way that your listeners do, by caring for Mother Earth. We've got to care for the earth.
Absolutely.
This is where we live.
All right, last question, Matt. Mother Earth News listeners are familiar with all of the benefits that one gets from gardening. Can you just briefly list one or two of your favorite characteristics that children gain while being outside and gardening?
Yeah, one is they get to appreciate the wonders and complexity of plants and the earth and the ecosystems and ecology. Okay, so they develop a natural interest. I think that's really important. I think also for children from a troubled background going into a garden, particularly with their friends, amongst the flowers and the bees and the insects, all these things that we naturally tune into is really important. I think that's, very important for the children to get out there for their mental health, really, for their mental well-being. So yeah, they get an understanding, they get the mental well-being. And I know that when they get through to teenagers, because we've had them ourselves, it drops away, but it never leaves them. And I think it's really important that children should learn and understand and see the wonder of plants and the wonder of the outside world before they go through the IT phase. And then when they get their own home and perhaps can grow things in window boxes, they're that little bit older and they remember the joy that they had as a child, because that's important. So I think you lay the foundations so you can revisit and build the house a bit later on in your life.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for speaking with us. Our conversation on gardening for kids has been educational, but more importantly, inspirational.
Oh, thanks, Kenny. Thank you for having me. And everybody out there who's listening, get gardening and share it with your children. It's the best thing you can ever do for them. And I love them and be kind to them, of course.
We thank you, the listener, for joining our podcast and encourage you to share it with your friends, colleagues, and family. To listen to more podcasts and to learn more, visit our website, motherearthnews.com. You can also follow our social media platforms from that link and ask questions for future podcasts. And remember, no matter how brown your thumb is, you can always cultivate kindness.
You've just heard our episode with Matt Biggs about children and gardening. You can reach us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any comments or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Jessica Mitchell, John Moore, and Kenny Coogan. Music for this episode is Travel Light by Jason Shaw. This Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications. Learn more about us at motherearthnews.com. Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.